So I don't know about you, but I miss the times when operating systems came on physical disks and had offline installations. And while you can still technically buy physical releases of things like Windows 11, they're mostly shipping on bootable USBs, since OEMs have stopped even including optical drives on PCs, and for the most part they just keep pushing the online installers, which forces you to register and put your firstborn as collateral. But before that, yeah, although you had things like online updates, you'd always have the installation disk itself and even service packs actually on an actual physical disk, whether that's a CD, DVD, or a floppy. And while I did my fair share of OS installs from DVDs and CDs, whether it be macOS, Windows, or Linux, the only OS I ever installed from floppies was DOS and Windows 3.1 or 11. And that makes sense. I mean, they were only a couple of megs in size, and at the time they were shipping, optical media still wasn't supported or common. And I just like having these discs around since I use them all the time, so when I saw this thing being listed for sale at my local auction site, I was immediately interested. The whole thing was being sold in a lot for a decent price, and there were a bunch of used floppies in there, as well as a couple of boxes of new old stock floppies, an unopened box of 8cm CDRs, and a thing that really caught my eye, which were these Microsoft floppies. And yeah, they were Windows 95 setup discs, so you might think, okay, what's so exciting about that? Well, it was the sheer amount of them, and the fact that I could see that one of them said Disk 27, which gave me a little hint of deja vu. See, I immediately remembered seeing photos like these on places like Reddit and Facebook, and I know from before that this really was the last big OS release to be officially available on 3.5-inch floppy disks. And while your normal retail releases usually had way less floppies, like 13, I have never seen this particular release in the wild, even if it was just the bare discs like these. So for whatever reason, that seemed cool to me, so I jumped on it, not only to have these elusive discs on hand, but to actually try something I've never done before, installing Windows 95 from a ludicrous number of floppies. Now, there was a problem in that I couldn't see all the floppies in the picture, so I wasn't sure if this release was complete, and upon getting it, yeah, I could see some of the floppies were missing. Not a lot though. So since I also got that fresh new box of sealed floppies, I thought, heck, let's use those suckers to complete this monster bundle. And for that purpose, I got out one of my favorite Windows 98 machines, this IBM ThinkPad 820M, which I use all the time for many things, but also to make floppies. I use a program called WinImage to make bootable and also just regular floppies from image files. So I went online certain I'd find plenty 28 floppy releases, and yes, it's 28 since it's 27 setup disks plus the boot disk. And to my surprise, I couldn't find it anywhere. The closest thing I could get on sites like archive.org or WinWorld were 21 disk releases. So since the discs I was missing were from that range regardless, I thought I'd try those out, since I figured all the cap files and everything were probably the same. So I went on writing those floppies, and I had my first case of foreshadowing. I wanted to get those nice fresh floppies out, since I had terrible luck with used floppies from various different sources and batches. Just awful experience. And to avoid that, I thought I'd just use these new discs. However, even with these being brand spanking new, well, new old stock, I still had a couple that had errors while writing. More on that in a minute. Fortunately, I seemingly had enough good discs to complete my little collection, and in my mind I was ready to start installing my very first floppy exclusive version of Windows 95. Now, question was, what machine to install this thing on? And while I had plenty of supported PCs in my basement, there were a number of ones I still have yet to test, so I thought this was a good opportunity for it. One of them was this nice compact Armada V300, a Celeron-based machine that would initially come with either Win98 or NT, but I thought it would do a good job running Windows 95 as well. And while it did turn on and post, it complained it couldn't boot from the hard drive, so I didn't know if it was missing one or there was no OS or what. Well, let's just try those discs now to see if it would boot from the boot disk. And well, it wouldn't. It said it wasn't a bootable DOS disk. Huh. Let's try a known good boot disk just in case there's something wrong with the drive. Boots right up, and yeah, says there's no hard disk. Well, that's concerning. So I tried something I probably should have done first, which is to check those setup disks in my ThinkPad. And they all had good numbered cap files which corresponded with the numbers on the disk, but what worried me were the names of those cap files. Lotus? Please don't tell me someone rewrote the disks with a Lotus 123 installation. I checked the boot disk. This is definitely Lotus 123. Why? Just why? So now what to do? I could rewrite those with correct files, but I only had that 21 disk release. Well, after rolling up my sleeves and brewing some coffee, I tried hunting down that 28 disk release. And as you usually do, you find these things on a Russian website, in this case olddos.ru. Really useful site, although, turn on your firewall just in case. And lo and behold, there was not a 28 but a 30 disc release, 29 plus a boot disc. So at this point I started, rewriting some of those stupid Lotus discs, and I just did a couple first just to see if the installation would even start. And sure enough, I could boot off of that disk again, and the setup again said I have no hard drive to install it to, so I went to see what's up with that. It was underneath a little door on the bottom cover, and it was just a regular 2.5-inch ID laptop drive, but it had a little conversion board which brought it up to the necessary connector. So I took it out and installed a new one, but upon trying to fit it, I didn't think it was going all the way in, since the cover wouldn't lay flat. Sure enough, a couple of bolts were preventing it from seating all the way in, so after taking those off, it would all fit nicely. But before actually trying my new drive, I went back to the old one, and since I figured whoever had it apart before probably just didn't install this correctly. And yep, as soon as I booted up again, it started booting into Windows XP. And then it crashed. So yeah, it wouldn't boot into XP or the safe mode, so I figured there was no harm in formatting it and trying to run Windows 95 from it. But after starting that boot disk again, I ran into some issues. The computer just acted up. It wouldn't go through with the format, it started rebooting by itself, and I found it had some power issues, like the input jack was losing connection. And since I didn't really want to deal with any of this, 14 floppies into my OS installation, yeah, I just figured it was time for a second computer. Enter PC number 2, this cool 486 I featured before, and it has both DOS and Windows 3.11. My idea, since I had it all set up with the drivers and everything, was to take a different drive and put a dedicated Windows 95 installation on that. And unlike that compact laptop, I had no trouble kickstarting the installation, setting up the drive, formatting it, and I've started my long journey of feeding it disks. Now, I know I'll get people who have a totally different experience and opinion, but for me, the main issue I always had with floppies is that they're either extremely unreliable or temperamental or both. Now, I'm certain this has to do with the fact that they're getting on in years, but even if they're brand new old stock, I've yet to find a completely working set, and this isn't the first box I've opened either. I know some people say how reliable they were, and I don't remember actually having issues with them as a kid, but I mean it's probably been like 30 years since the last good quality batch of floppies was actually being manufactured. And even with the ones that worked fine the first time I wrote something to them, as soon as I tried rewriting them, I got error codes on the writing side, and sometimes just one track being screwed up means the installation can't complete, and I have to restart it and go through the process all over again. Now, this stupid issue of having to restart your installation thankfully stops once you get into the actual portion where it starts copying the cap files, since even though I did get some errors constantly, and sometimes I was able to resolve them by just trying to read that track again, but sometimes I'd have to write a new disk since, I don't know, like I've said, even if you have a single byte of that cap file that was corrupt, or it skipped a track or whatever, yeah, it will not go through. Now, you do have an option of skipping files during installation, but obviously that's not very recommended and I didn't want to do that. However, even with all that said, I thought I was getting somewhere until I started getting some issues on the PC side. Yeah, during one of my many restarts of the process, the computer just stopped reading the disks. First it had trouble just booting from them, then it stopped reading the contents of the disk altogether. So that's nice, and I made a run to my basement to pick up a couple of spare ones I had, but they didn't behave any differently, which made me think there was something wrong with the floppy controller itself. Nice. Enter machine number 3. This slightly newer Pentium 1 PC made by Siemens. I also showed it before in one of my videos, and this thing did have a really nice clean installation of Windows 95, but had since had issues booting into it, and checking the drive, yeah, it seemed to have something majorly wrong with it. That being the case, I just used the one that we were already using on the 486 machine, and like before, it had no issues formatting the drive and starting an installation, and I was able to resume the nervous process of floppy disk Russian roulette. And out of all the floppies I had on the bench there, and I had like 100 at one point, again, I had very little luck finding the ones that would finish the entire imaging writing process without errors. And for some things it doesn't matter, but for installing an operating system, you really want to have those dialed in. And this whole process of dealing with old failing tech and getting those stupid floppies ready took me like 2 days. And once I was finally seemingly done with everything, the worst was yet to come. So as I was going through my last disk, it told me the copying process is now done and I'd have to restart the machine to finish the setup process. So I did, but after it had restarted, yeah, invalid system disk. Cool. No operating system found. Sweet.
What the man?
At this point, it wouldn't boot from the hard drive, it wouldn't boot from the floppy, like the previous machine. And I tried setting all the parameters in the BIOS, changing the boot order, auto-detecting the drive, nothing. I again tried different floppy drive, just in case, nothing. And after a while, it stopped booting altogether. Awesome. It did that before too. No idea why, so that's great. At this point I was ready to give up. But I knew all the data had been copied to the drive itself, so I wondered if I could just try it in a different computer to see if it would boot from there. Enter machine number 4, or 2. It was that DOS PC we had on the bench before, but since I just wanted to see if it would boot from the hard drive, I wasn't worried about that floppy drive. And yeah, this to me seemed like the first bit of good luck I had since yesterday. It started booting into Windows 95.
Oh! Whoa! Hey, there it is!
It walked me through the initial setup, and I waited until it sorted all the plug-and-play devices and drivers, and wow, I didn't actually think we'd see this, but here we are. It complained about not having a PS2 mouse plugged in. Well, this PC doesn't have a PS2 port, only serial, so I rebooted the machine with the serial mouse plugged in to see if it had loaded the drivers, and sure enough it had. I could see the little intro tour of Windows 95 and I was ready to start exploring it. And good god, I mean, I knew it would have some features missing since there's only like 40 megs of files on those floppies, but this is even less than I was expecting. And while expected, I was still sad to have most of the multimedia and of course games missing. That's very sad. Checking over the device manager, I could see there was indeed something screwy with that floppy drive. It thought it was a 5¼ inch one, and like I said, it wouldn't read anything. It also didn't recognize my sound blasters, so I'd have to sort out the drivers myself for that. But the optical drive was there, so I decided to test it, and since we had no games, I figured I'd pop some in there with my burned DOS CD. And even though you really want to run these under real mode, Windows 95 does an excellent job running the vast majority of them without that. So I installed a couple, and I already know this machine does a beautiful job with the majority of them, although by 1995-96 it was already getting a little bit long in the tooth, so things like Quake here, yeah, not really the greatest experience, although still playable. But the reason you might want to install Windows 95 instead of your regular DOS are all the early Windows games, but those are really not well suited to this 486. So yeah, I spent like 2 days going through obsolete media and hardware hell, only to end up with an inferior version of Windows 95 on an objectively less than ideal hardware, and I somehow still had fun? Yeah, it was like an itch I wanted to scratch, and I don't really think I need to go back to this, like, ever. Thank you very much. I will still keep this hard drive in here alongside my other drive which has Windows 3.11 on it, so I can switch between them, which is kinda nice. I mean, I like the idea of having Windows 95 on here, even if it is a bit crippled compared to the CD release. And I have to say I'm proud I persevered with all the issues I had. I still made it out alive. So yeah, just a bit of a reality check. We started this episode with a jolt of nostalgia about physical media. Well, the only thing I have to say, maybe those bootable USBs and online installers are not that bad after all, yeah? At least compared to something like this. And I hope you at least enjoyed watching me struggle with this. Hopefully it was entertaining. And if it was, then great. You might like some of my other videos. I do them every week. Retrospective, reviews, restorations, repairs, and all sorts of other nerdy tech stuff. If you like what I do and you'd like to support me, you can do so on Patreon for just $1 a month, or more if you'd like. You'll get early access to my videos, and I usually have a couple for my supporters to see first. If you'd like to chat with me and other users, you can join our Discord server. All the links will be in the video description. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.